Are you prescribing exercises with a correct load, but without taking into account the speed of execution? Because if so, your patient might not be achieving the necessary muscle activation to make progress, even if the exercise and the weight are both appropriate. And this is one of the most common mistakes in rehabilitation and reconditioning. Thinking that only the exercise and the load matter, when in reality there is a third variable that completely changes the patient's neuromuscular response: the speed of execution. Today, you're going to understand why speed can be the difference between a patient who makes progress and one who gets stuck. And what's more, we're going to look at this with objective data obtained through surface electromyography, analyzing 3 widely used exercises: the squat, the hip thrust, and the Bulgarian split squat. Because doing a slow, controlled squat is not the same as doing exactly the same squat at maximum speed, even if the weight is identical. The nervous system does not recruit motor units in the same way, and muscle activation changes. The problem is that without objective tools, that difference is invisible. You can't see it, you can't assume it, you can only measure it. In a study carried out using the mDurance surface EMG system, muscle activation of the gluteus maximus, biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and rectus femoris was compared during 3 exercises performed with the same load but at 2 different speeds: maximum speed and controlled speed. And the results were very clear. In the Bulgarian split squat, all the muscles assessed showed a significant increase in activation when the exercise was performed at maximum speed. This makes it a particularly interesting tool when we're looking for powerful overall activation of the posterior chain and the quadriceps at the same time. Something different happened in the conventional squat. Only the gluteus maximus and the biceps femoris increased their activation when moving from controlled speed to maximum speed, while the semitendinosus and the rectus femoris hardly changed at all. And this has very important clinical implications, because if your therapeutic goal is to improve activation of the gluteus maximus or the biceps femoris, you might not need to increase the weight, but rather modify the speed of execution. Next, we have the hip thrust, probably one of the most commonly used exercises to work the gluteus maximus. Here, the data showed that when performed at maximum speed, the only muscle that significantly increased its activation was precisely the gluteus maximus. The hamstrings practically did not respond to the change in pace. This reinforces the idea that the hip thrust is a very selective exercise for the gluteus, and that introducing maximum speed can further enhance that activation without increasing the external load. Now think about the most common clinical scenario. The professional chooses the correct exercise, selects an appropriate load, but neither controls nor modifies the speed of execution. What happens then? That quite often the patient does not reach the activation threshold necessary to generate real neuromuscular adaptations. And this results in slower progressions, seemingly inexplicable plateaus, and the feeling that the exercise isn't working, when in reality the problem isn't the exercise or the weight, but rather the pace at which it is being performed. Because muscle activation doesn't depend solely on the load, it also depends on the contraction time, the intention behind the movement, and the speed. Now imagine a patient undergoing rehabilitation after an injury, where the main objective is to strengthen the gluteus maximus. The classic strategy would be to progressively increase the load in the hip thrust. But the data suggest another, much more interesting option in certain phases of recovery. Maintain a moderate load and use maximum speed as the variable for progression. What do we achieve with that? Greater activation of the glute without needing to increase the mechanical stress on structures that still cannot tolerate high loads. And this is precisely one of the great advantages of working with real-time EMG. It allows you to fine-tune exercise prescription much more without having to rely on intuition. With systems like mDurance, you can see which muscles are actually being activated during each phase of the movement and how that activation changes depending on the speed of execution. You can check whether the gluteus maximus is really working as you expected, adjust the tempo before changing the load, and use speed as an independent variable for progression. The conclusion is very clear: execution speed is not a secondary detail in the prescription of therapeutic exercise. It is a variable with a direct impact on muscle activation, and nevertheless it still isn't measured or systematically adjusted in clinical settings.